One 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 two one two one 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 two. Tambah. One two. Check mic test 1 2 3. Mic testing test. Mic testing test.
Yes, ma'am. Yun. One ma'am. Okay, ma'am. This.
Oh, Joshua.
Oo. Ha? Wait.
Hello, mic test.
Kita ba yung ano? Dito sa baba? Hindi. Doon ka Facebook dun.
Hello. Okay, so good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Those who are with us online in this first webinar series on as part of our Indigenous Peoples Month celebration. We will be starting in 1 minute. Okay, to start this webinar for today, let us have our national anthem followed by the Cordillera hymn and prayer by Mr. Gary Dongaya of NCIP CAR.
Cradled by majestic mountains, blessed with nature's flowing fountains, blooming flowers and verdant hills, is a region of murmuring rills. Here the freedom-loving glory won, we shall forever sing. Neath the sky the rains may gather, angry clouds may crazily wander, but the sun shines forever fair as we climb up the golden stairs. Dreams of peace, of oneness and progress, cherished goals our region presses, striving to build a brighter dawn for our children to call their own. Cordillera, region of wonder, hail, beloved land, your name we shall not fail. On
Diyan, siyan mang pili lamang panpantay ja mga kas sinananay sakit biyanaan. Amami cabaton ni at cumpig sa laingan siya ni. Anak no yawat sinahili, sino yung kawanan, tatakoy man susunutan ni. Amami, siyan mampakawanta pasulni, siya kon ba pakawanin, nandiyan susunod ni nakapasuran siya ni. Amami ay apigsaan, apuni dyan nan nga tiyan, at chomrosan naning kapag sayatan tawan at yun ni mga totan susunod ni. Anang cawat ni siyan amani, apuni dyan bingatan no, ay chay-chayagon ni. Amami, amaya punijan, ingka panpantajan, ija cayum tancanay madin, inkan mahililan tajum nan lagsak japiksa, cabaton ni kasinan laing biadat com, tasijako na con ni tancay susunod ni. Anago nan ko cabon ni amani apuni jan. Amen.
Thank you, Mr. Donggayaw, for that wonderful indigenous prayer. So, good morning po sa ating lahat. And live and alive, we're here at the RDC Hall with, of course, our first speaker of this webinar series, Dr. R.R. Rovelios, the Chancellor of UP Baguio. So, for the welcome remarks, may we have Director Manuel Jaramilla, the Chairperson for the Committee on Indigenous Peoples' Concerns and Regional Director of NCIP CAR. So while waiting, may we just first acknowledge our participants in today's webinar. So Sir RR, ngayong the first webinar, no? We have registered at least 300 participants via Zoom. Zoom lang po yun, wala pa yung Facebook and the YouTube. So for the attendees, confirmed attendees who are with us through online this morning, we have Abra State Institute of Science and Technology, Baguio City National Science High School, Baguio General Hospital and Medical Center, Baguio Water District, Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, Benguet State University, BIFAR-CAR, Center for Development Programs in the Cordillera, Cooperative Development Authority, CAR, Cordillera Study Center of UP Baguio, Crystal Cave Elementary School, the Department of Agriculture, Philippine Fiber Industry Development Authority, Department of Science and Technology, Department of Agriculture, Department of Budget and Management, Department of Environment and Natural Resources, Department of Foreign Affairs, Department of Justice, Region 1, Department of Public Works and Highways, DepEd Baguio, DepEd CAR, DepEd Kalinga, Department of Trade and Industry, Ifugao, DFA, CO Baguio, DILAG Integrated School, DILG CAR, DITENG, DOH CHD CAR, DOST ABRA, DOST CAR, PSTC MP, DOST Mountain Province, DOT CAR, DSWD CAR, DTI Baguio Benguet, Easter College, EMB CAR, FPOP, Gohang National High School, Ifugao State University, the IPED School, Kalinga National High School, Kalinga State University, LGU Aguinaldo Ifugao, LGU Asipulo, LGU Baay Likwan Abra, LGU Conner Apayao, LGU Dagyoman Abra, LGU Lagangilang Abra, LGU Manabo in Abra, LGU Mangkayan in Benguet, LGU Mayuyaw Ifugao, LGU Pasil Kalinga, LGU Sagada Mountain Province, LGU Santa Marcela Apayao, the LRA, MGB CAR, Mountain Province State Polytechnic College, National Commission on Indigenous Peoples CAR, National Housing Authority, National Intelligence Coordinating Agency, National Meat Inspection Service CAR, National Youth Commission, NCIP Apayao, NCIP Luna CSC, NCIP Benguet, NCIP Itogon, CSC Benguet, NCIP Apayao, of course, NEDA, our host of today's webinar, Nueva Vizcaya People's Museum and Library, Office of Civil Defense Cordillera, Office of the Provincial Prosecutor Benguet, and of course we have organizations also with us online, participating online, the Parent Teachers Association, the Parole and Probation Administration, PEACE, PEZA BCEZ, PEZA EHSD, Philippine Export Zone Authority Baguio, Philippine Information Agency, PPA CAR, Presidential Management Staff, Professional Regulation Commission, PSA RSSO CAR, St. Louis University, SDO Baguio City, Securities and Exchange Commission, Baguio Extension Office, Tubtaba, University of the Philippines, Baguio, and University of the Philippines, Los Baños. So yun po yung registered participants natin this morning. Wala pa po dyan yung, of course, we are live on Facebook and YouTube. So there are more participants po with us in this morning's webinar. Okay, so may we now have the welcome remarks by NCIP Regional Director Manny Haramilia.
month in the lives of the indigenous peoples of the Philippines. It is regarded that the case of Carino versus Insular Government is a landmark case in which the highest court of the land recognized the rights of the indigenous peoples to their ancestral domains or ancestral lands by recognizing the concept of native land or native title. Hence, the month of October is equally celebrated by the indigenous peoples in the Philippines. It is the month that the landmark legislation was finally signed by the President of the Republic of the Philippines, the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act of 1997 or RA 8371. This law was regarded as the first of its kind worldwide. This month of October marks the 23rd year of the birth of IPRA. Despite its 23rd year, however, still, these historical injustices which IPRA seeks to correct remains. Thus, this year's theme of correcting historical injustice to the indigenous peoples is very timely. IPRA was enacted by Congress to supposedly address the centuries-old neglect to the indigenous peoples. To re-echo the sponsorship speech of the then Senator Juan Flavier, and I quote, "The indigenous cultural communities, including the Bangsamoro, have long suffered from the dominance and neglect of government controlled by the majority. Massive migration of their Christian brothers to their homeland shrunk their territory, and many of the tribal Filipinos were pushed to the hinterlands. Resisting the intrusion, dispossessed of their ancestral land, and with the massive exploitation of their natural resources by the elite among the migrant population, they became marginalized. And the government has been an indispensable party to this insidious conspiracy against the indigenous cultural communities. It organized and supported the resettlement of people to their ancestral land, which was massive during the Commonwealth and early years of the Philippine Republic. Pursuant to the Regalian Doctrine, first introduced to our system by Spain through the Royal Decree of 13 February 1894, or the Maura Law, the government passed laws to legitimize the wholesale land grabbing and provide for easy titling or grant of lands to migrant homesteaders within the traditional areas of the ICCs. He further declared that the IPs are the offspring and heirs of the peoples who have first inhabited and cared for the land long before any central government was established. Their ancestors had territories over which they ruled themselves and related with other tribes. These territories, the land, include people, their dwelling, the mountains, the water, the air, plants, forest, and the animals. This is their environment in its totality. Their existence as indigenous peoples is manifested in their own lives through political, economic, socio-cultural, and spiritual practices. The indigenous people's culture is the living and irrefutable proof to this. Their survival depends on the securing or acquiring land rights, asserting the rights to it, and depending on it. Otherwise, indigenous peoples shall cease to exist as distinct peoples. For her part, Representative Andulana's sponsorship speech declared that this representation, as early as in the 8th Congress, filed a bill of similar implications that would promote, recognize the rights of indigenous cultural communities within the framework of national unity and development. Apart from this, it is our obligation, the government's obligation, to assure and ascertain that these rights shall be well preserved and the cultural traditions as well as the indigenous laws that remained long before this republic was established shall be preserved and promoted. There is a need to look into these matters seriously, and early approval of the substitute bill shall bring into reality the aspirations, the hope and dreams of more than 12 million Filipinos, that they be considered in the mainstream of the Philippine society as we fashion for the year 2000. End quote. Despite RA 8371, several issues concerning indigenous peoples are being consistently raised before the Regional Development Council through the Committee on Indigenous Peoples Concerned. These issues include misappropriation of Cordillera attire, indigenous intellectual property, misinformation regarding Igorots in basic educational textbooks, and other cultural misappropriations and/or misrepresentations. The latest of which is the use of the different ethno-linguistic groups to name a sleeper brand. The theme for this year's celebration, correcting historical injustices for indigenous people's rights and welfare, is very timely. Even with the passage of IPRA, injustices against our IPs are still imminent. One of the many issues that needs proper discourse, especially here in the Cordillera, is the appropriate median of usage of IKSPs, particularly on the wearing of attires. This has been the long debate between and among the IP and non-IP stakeholders of CAR. Our IKSPs plays an integral role on our indent. Taken out of context and without a united view of the same, may lead to an imminent cultural ethnocide. How we view our IKSPs today determines the kind of mindset our next generation of IPs will be upholding as the future administrators of the Cordillera Administrative Region. In line with the 23rd year of IPRA celebration, RDC, through the Committee on Indigenous Peoples Concerned, is sponsoring this series of webinars to serve as a forum to generate inputs for policy recommendations to better address these issues. These issues being tackled during this series of webinars are very timely, especially with ongoing advocacy for the region's quest for self-determination through the establishment of the autonomous region of the Cordillera. With this series of seminars, we hope to contextualize cultural misappropriations and/or misrepresentations that, despite the dynamic nature of our culture, in the innovations we have adopted through generations, we will be able to preserve our cultures and traditions. It is with fervent hope that through this series of webinars, through the help of the different government agencies, we can be able to generate policy recommendations to further development, preservation, and protection of our cultures. In this webinar series, topics are divided into 4. 1. Contextualize or cultural misrepresentation. 2nd, cultural appropriation. 3rd, differences of cultural preservation and innovation. And lastly, examine policies covering development and protection of culture. The Committee on Indigenous Peoples Concerned Technical Working Group was able to summon credible resource speakers from all corners of the region. We likewise opened this webinar to all those who are interested. So with these earnest thoughts and pieces of advice, I wish you all the best in achieving the objectives of this webinar. We encourage our participants not to hold back on their questions and comments. Let's make this webinar series an interactive one. Let our questions and comments, the heat of colliding ideas, fan the embers of the true spirit of IPRA. Thank you, and may the spirit and grace of Kabunyan be with us all. God bless to one and all. Mabuhay ang Cordillera, agbyag dagiti indigenous peoples.
Thank you, Director Haramilya. He is supposed to be with us today here at the RDC Hall, but with some pressing matters, he has to, I think he's still in Kalinga today. First of all, greeting all teachers a happy Teachers Day. Happy Teachers Day, Sir RR. Ongoing program po nila sa DepEd CAR ngayon. So I hope, and there are others naman po na who is joining us online, the teachers from the different provinces. Okay, so manan naimbag nga agsapa kada tayo amin. I am Ryan Dale Mangusan, Vice Chair of the Committee on Indigenous Peoples' Concerns of the Cordillera Regional Development Council. I will serve as your moderator for this webinar series. So, 4 na Wednesdays po tayo magkasama. Today is the first, and then the next Wednesdays, October, with different speakers and different topics, of course. The conduct of this webinar series was agreed upon during the first quarter meeting of the CIPC held on February 18, 2020, in response to the observation that issues on cultural misrepresentation, cultural appropriation, and commodification of culture often come up during CIPC meetings. Instead of simply recording these reports and discussing the issues among committee members, the CIPC thought it should hold a regional forum this October where these concerns can be examined by a multi-sectoral gathering. The activity was seen as a venue for encouraging public discussion of issues besetting indigenous peoples. Led by capable resource speakers, these discussions were meant to enable a rich understanding of these issues, and the result was projected to feed into policy recommendations by the committee, the CIPC, to adequately address these concerns. Unfortunately, the original design of the activity had to be modified in view of restrictions brought by the COVID-19 pandemic. The national and local government now promote intensified health and safety measures to eliminate further causes of infection. With mass gathering disallowed under these safety measures, this activity can only be carried out through a virtual platform at this time. Despite a remote mode of delivery, we believe that the original intent of the activity can still be achieved because virtual technology facilitates asynchronous, albeit remote, meeting of many participants, and it allows real-time and exchange of ideas. The recordings of the webinar series, which will be archived online, may also be used as accessible resources for further engagements in the issues that are tackled. At a larger context, the Philippine and Regional Development Plan framework, the promotion of culture and values is one of the strategies under the major pillar Malasakit, or enhancing the social fabric. RDP 2017 to 2022, or the Regional Development Plan, supports the role of culture and values in enhancing social cohesion, including inclusion and equity, as this is aligned to the region's aim to preserve its unique culture and heritage while it pursues development. By encouraging the discussion of concerns related to culture and its entanglement with contemporary conditions, this activity is in line with the above vision of social cohesion and cultural development. Moreover, the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, UNPFII 2020 session theme is Peace, Justice, and Strong Institutions, the role of indigenous peoples in implementing Sustainable Development Goal 16. This activity promotes the involvement of indigenous peoples in thinking about and acting on the issues that affect their community. Instead of being mere recipients of decisions, indigenous peoples are motivated to actively listen to of concerns that have real effects in their lives. It is through such participation that indigenous peoples are able to help build strong institutions. The webinar series titled IP Rights, Cultural Innovation, and Autonomy has 4 parts aired every Wednesday of October in celebration of Indigenous Peoples Month. And the 23rd anniversary the 23rd anniversary of the enforcement of the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act. This morning, we are having the first webinars in the series. We welcome all participants who are joining us through various platforms. For the format of our webinar, we will first listen to the presentation of our resource speaker, which will be followed by an open forum. For participating via Zoom, please use the chat room function to send your questions or use the raise hand feature and wait for the moderator to acknowledge you. There may be a queue in asking questions, so we request everyone's patience. To enable wide participation among attendees, we request those who will ask questions to be brief and direct to the point. We also request all Zoom participants to mute their audio and only unmute when acknowledged to ask a question. For participants joining through Facebook Live, please send your thoughts or questions through a comment on NEDA Cordillera Facebook account. So today, we shall now proceed for our first webinar with our first speaker. Here to deliver the first lecture in the webinar series organized by the Committee on Indigenous Peoples' Concerns in celebration of Indigenous Peoples Month 2020 is Dr. Raymond D. Robillos. He is a professor of history at the Department of History and Philosophy, College of Social Sciences, University of the Philippines, Baguio. He has been the Chancellor of UP Baguio from 2012 to present. Before becoming the Chancellor, he was Dean of the College of Social Sciences of UP Baguio from 2006 to 2012. Dr. Robillos is a well-published author of academic works related to ethnohistory and identity politics among indigenous peoples. Some of his works published especially relevant to this webinar topic are Constructing the Boundaries of Places, Spaces, and Identities in Abra in the Cordillera Review Journal of Philippine Culture and Society in 2016. The Development, Power, and Identity Politics in the Philippines in the Politics of Resource Extraction, Indigenous Peoples, Corporations, and the State, published by Palgrave Macmillan in 2012. Number 3 is the Writing History in the Philippines, narrating and theorizing culture in the Journal of History. Philippine Ethnohistories, the Luzon, Cordillera, and Beyond in 2009. Dr. Robillos also presented papers in national and international conferences pertinent to identity, politics, especially in the construction and representation of cultural identities, such as Inclusive Development in Cultural Identities, inaugural lecture at the launching of the PhD in Development Studies at UP Mindanao held in September 2015. Paradox of Identity Politics, Rights and Power at the UP Centennial Lecture on the Regulation of Our Identities, Indigenous Peoples and the Enigma of Legal Representation, UP Diliman in October 2008. Dr. Rebelio served as team leader, lecturer, trainer, evaluator, and other various capacities to strengthen the University of the Philippines culture of research and public service, as well as supporting other state universities and government agencies in the country. Dr. Rebelio is actively engaged in leading multi-sectoral organizations to inform public policy and local governance, most notably in the city of Baguio. He is the chairman of the Baguio We Want movement, a broad multi-sectoral coalition of CSOs advocating for sustainable development of Baguio City and the Blissed area from February 2014 to present. He is a governing board member of the Baguio Crafts and Arts Collective and lead author and organizer in the application of Baguio City as a UNESCO-created city from May to October 2017. For his academic leadership and civic engagements, Dr. Rebelio received various recognitions. For instance, the 2014 Outstanding Alumnus Award in Excellence in Tertiary Education Management from the Baguio City National High School Alumni Association, the 2013 Award for Outstanding Contribution to Education during the 4th Asia's Best B-School Awards presented by the World Education Congress in July 2013 in Singapore. And the 2012 UP International Publication Award for Publication, the Development, Power, and Identity Politics in the Philippines. So, to speak on the topic contextualizing cultural misrepresentation, please welcome Dr. Raymond D. Rovilios.
Thank you. Hi, Ryan. Thank you very much for that lengthy, generous introduction. Naimbag nga bigat tayo amin, Cordillera region, and the nation, and even the world, I think, is watching this morning. I was given a very challenging topic because I know the issue of cultural representation continues to be a controversial and even emotional issue up until now. Okay, but yeah, I'm taking the challenge, and I hope that you will engage me in a discussion later on if I said something that is not correct or that is not sensitive to the cultures of indigenous people, especially in the Cordillera region. Okay, let me start by showing some images depicting the Igorots or the Cordillera people as follows, okay? So here is a grade 4 textbook, 2018 publication, which states that, sabi, ang hagdang-hagdang palayan sa Ifugao na makikita sa rehiyon ng Ilocos, mga talampas ng Bukidnon sa rehiyon ng Hilagang Mindanao at maging mga lambak tulad. Okay. So this book states that Banawe rice terraces of Ifugao are in Ilocos region. Okay? So there's an error there already, a misrepresentation of fact. Next slide, please. Another example of misrepresentation of Igorots in official DepEd textbooks has this, no? Introducing si Gambo na isang Igorot, no? Pero siya ay nakatira sa Zambales at mahilig maglaro kasama ang kanyang mga kaibigan. Ano ang mali rito? Na si Gambo ay isang Igorot, tama yon, pero ang mali ay siya ay nasa Zambales. Unbelievable na meron pa ganitong klaseng grave error, no? sa DepEd books na nababasa ng milyon-milyong mga estudyante sa buong Pilipinas. Next slide, please. Ito naman is an Ilocano K-12 textbook which says that the indigenous groups in the Philippines that are Igorots live in the mountains of Ilocos Sur, Ilocos Norte, La Union, and Pangasinan. Okay? And that further, the Igorots in the Cordillera Administrative Region are found in a place called Italia. Saan ang Italia dito? Meron bang Italia dito sa Cordillera? Did I miss anything from my geography? Okay. So this is a gross error, factual error, no, found in our textbooks. Next slide. Okay, so these images that I showed you are examples of cultural misrepresentation due to ignorance or lack of cultural knowledge. Okay? And this is something that we can correct. Okay? Easier because we can revise textbooks. We can, although it's very expensive to do that, but an error of omission, okay, is, I think, more forgivable than an error of commission, okay, which is what is going to follow. The more dangerous, I think, and the more insidious, dangerous, and form of representation or misrepresentation is one that is more substantive and deeply rooted, and because they are dealing with more culture, supposedly cultural based, and presented as factual, and taken for granted as true because they have been entrenched in our educational and cultural institutions and even government policies. Let me give you an example of this. So you have here an Igorot, a blog about the Igorot. Ang sabi dito, I quote natin, is he an Igorot? That's why he doesn't understand the importance of paperwork and time. I started to guess, baka nga Igorot eto. I don't have any goat or hen to pay him if he doesn't want money. Ha ha ha. Okay. So here, Igorot is used as a term to mean backward, low to understand, and ignorant. Okay. Next. Ito naman is a private conversation in a messenger showing persistent stereotypes about Igorot people. Tingin mo bagay sa akin magpakulot? Wag. Magmumukha kang Igorot. Ha 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 ha. Di ko kinaya yung Igorot. Ha 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 ha. Pango, maitim, kulot. Okay. Next slide. This one is a public Facebook post after Filipino comedian and actor Arvin Jimenez, or Tado, his death in a bus crash off a road in Sitio Paggang, Talubin, Bontoc Mountain Province. May mga Igorots pala sa Facebook, buti naman may computer na sa mountains, haha. Magpapabalita na nga kayo sa pagkamatay pa ni Idol Tado. Buti naman, di nyo kinain ang katawan niya, ha ha ha. Okay. So, again, this poster describes the Igorot as technologically backward and even cannibalistic. Next slide. Another example from a K-12 textbook, this time for the grade 1 level, 2018. A quiz question asked what a person whose parents are from the Cordillera would look. Okay. Kapwa Pilipino mula sa bulubundukin ng Cordillera, ang nanay at tatay ni Beno. siya ay A, maitim at maliit at maitim, matangkad at maputi, matangkad at madilaw. Okay. So the stereotype, the stereotypical representation or caricature of indigenous peoples in the Cordillera are reproduced in these textbooks. Next slide. And finally, you have this comment from Senator Amy Marcos when she took over the office of Trillanes. He said, siguro magpapatawag na lang ako ng igorot namin dahil kailangan basbasan itong office room. Si Senator Trillanes yata ang nabunot eh. Okay, so here igorots are represented as something that they can own, igorots namin, no? Okay, objectified and caricatured as shamans, okay? That can bless supposedly rooms that are that need to be blessed. Okay. Now, these images, next slide please. These images are examples of cultural misrepresentations due to ethnocentrism, chauvinism, and discrimination, obviously. Ethnocentrism is defined as the act of judging a culture based on the values and norms of another culture. Okay, so parang I will judge a Kankanaey from my point of view as a Tagalog, and not from the point of view of the Kankanaey or Kankanaey himself or herself. And especially if the judgment is one of superiority-inferiority relationship, that I am more superior as a Tagalog than the Kankanaey I am describing, that is ethnocentrism. Chauvinism, on the other hand, is defined as, how do you call this? It's also similar to ethnocentrism, but this is bigger on a national scale, okay? The dominant ethnicity at the national level, or the majority people at the national level, look at the other, or look at the indigenous groups or minorities as inferior, okay? As inferior to the dominant ethnicity. That is chauvinism. And discrimination is making judgments or discriminating other people or ethnicities on the basis of their ethnicity. Okay? That's discrimination. Yung tipo sinasabing, backward ka kasi igorot ka. Mahina utak mo dahil igorot ka. That is discrimination because you are making a value judgment on that person based on his or her ethnicity, and that is based on biases, no, about the other or about the person being described as inferior. Okay. Next slide, please. Now, this form of misrepresentation, as I said, is more dangerous because they are based on meanings or significations, pagpapakahulugan sa Tagalog, no? Pagbibigay ng kahulugan or interpretation about other groups, in this case, mostly indigenous peoples, okay? In other words, they are constructed, no? They are presented, no, as this and that, okay? They are, and these meanings or significations or interpretations about indigenous peoples are taken as truth, okay? Nagiging katotohanan dahil sila ay paulit-ulit na itinuturo natin sa mga kabataan mula pa nung kindergarten sila hanggang sa maging koleyo sila. So they are also deeply rooted in history and institutions. As a historian, while looking at these examples of misrepresentations which were given to me by the research assistants at the Cordillera Studies Center, I just gave them an instruction. Just give me examples of misrepresentations. I did not give them any specific instructions. And our research assistants, I would like to acknowledge them, by the way, Karin Bangsoy, and I think also si Paula Pamintuan, our research associate, gave me images from their own research. And then I read them, and it's as if reading colonial documents over again. And that really unsettled me, disturbed me, because the description of indigenous peoples in the Cordillera, the Igorots, as cannibals, as dirty, as mahina utak, this had always been the content of colonial representations through ethnographies, mission reports, travel reports, photographs, from the time of Spanish colonialism, American colonialism, and even after independence. And it's continuing. And it's really bothersome. Now, we have to do something about this. So let me just bring you back then to history, okay? Because as I said, malalim yung hugot nito, yung pinanggagalingan ng misrepresentation. It dates back to history and it's reproduced by our cultural institutions, including educational institutions. Now, when you say context presentation, how do we understand, how do we make sense of these examples of misrepresentation? We look at power and power relations, okay? Who has the power to represent, Who takes the photos? Who writes about the indigenous peoples? Who makes films about indigenous peoples? Who publishes these textbooks about the indigenous peoples? These are all power-laden, Even as academics, when we do research among indigenous peoples, we go there with our educational background, we come from the universities, we go to there is power between us and our respondents. And therefore, power is everywhere, You cannot, especially with the issue of representation, central to this issue is sino ang may kapangyarihan. Who has the power to talk about oneself? Okay, to represent themselves, through these institutions. Obviously, it's the privileged, those who have power, those who have access to these powers, institutional of authority, whether political or cultural authority. Another factor is when we analyze misrepresentation, we can study them in the context of the prevailing theories of change or ideology or cultural theory or ideas, For example, social Darwinism during the time of during colonial period, which I will explain briefly later on. We can also analyze them in the context of why? Why were they presented that way? Is it related to the colonizing and the civilizing project of the colonizers, and later on by the nation state, that, look at these barbarians and savage Igoros. We need to modernize them. We need to assimilate them to the nation state. We need to Christianize them as part of the colonial project, of assimilation and, of course, subjugation and control of indigenous peoples. And finally, a lot of scholars, post-colonial scholars, have already analyzed that this representation of other, the othering of indigenous peoples, no, is actually due to the fact that the European self at that time was also not stable. It was not, the nation states, they were also still in the process of becoming nations. And so they needed an other to establish and to reinforce themselves. No? So they needed, they represented others as this and that because they wanted to affirm, to become more secure about themselves, actually. Okay? Because they were also anxious about their own identities. Okay? So that's, to me, will be the factors to consider to contextualize misrepresentation. Okay, let me give you now examples of these briefly through history and up to now. Next slide, please. Okay, I have 3 examples of misrepresentation in or through history: colonial narratives, narratives of nation or nation building, and narratives of resistance and human agency. Okay. Or self-representation. Okay, briefly lang ito, no? Because I'm not really talking about, this is a whole topic in itself, right? We talk about this for 1 semester in the university, okay? Throwback, Spanish colonial period. We know that, we know already because of William Henry Scott and other scholars that Igorot means, it really means people who live in the mountain, di ba? That is a term being used by the Ilocanos to refer to people who live in the hills. So, Igolod, actually, Igorod. So it did not, it was a simple label given to people who live in a particular place, di ba? But when the colonizers, the Spaniards came, they came in the Cordillera searching for what? For the gold. They have always been desirous, no, of coming to the Cordillera because they learned about the rich resources here, especially gold. But of course, we know that they were not successful because of the fierce resistance of indigenous peoples of the Cordillera. Okay. And because they were really parang, from the point of view of the Spaniards, they were pasaway, no? They refused to be colonized. They were labeled, no? The Igorot had a different meaning, no? In their description, in their government reports, in their ethnographies, no, in their travel reports, no, the Igorot, if you look at all these voluminous colonial documents, you will find the terms salvajes. Ibig sabihin, salvajes meaning savages. And you know that salvaje became a Tagalog term for salvaje, which means bad. Okay? So, well, actually, savages is an anthropological term at that time, which was really referring to a group of people going through a transition from primitive to barbarian to savages, eventually becoming civilized. No? So that's the unilinear evolution theory of change at that time, as popularized by social Darwinism. Okay. Now, in other words, from a very neutral, non-discriminatory term, Igorot, people from the mountain, nagbago ang meaning, ang representation at signification ng mga Igorot. Naging salvahe sila, bad. Naging infiel sila, or infiel means non-believers, no? And they became feroces, no? Fierce in the document. So, the term became derogatory, in other words. That's when the terms, I think, I think we can move to the next slide. I'm talking about, it's in the next slide now, okay. So, these documents, these colonial documents are also replete with descriptions of indigenous peoples in the Cordillera as dirty, cannibals, okay, feroces, fierce, wild, and tribus independientes. Ito siguro mas positive kasi talagang freedom, they had freedom eh. They were free. They were free for more than, for 350 years of colonial rule. They refused to be colonized by the Spaniards, maybe with the exception of the Abra